Draft Week 2022 has arrived. Let's talk about it on the CGAP Blitz. We have made it. We've had a little bit of a lull. We've had tons of free agency movements. But now we've got down to what really seems like actual good football. Something to look forward to. I always do it every spring, and it's something that really kind of kickstarts your fantasy drafts. You've got the NFL draft starting Thursday night, continuing Friday, finishing up on Saturday. 7 rounds, 4 of which are interesting. The other 3, you're just wanting to see what your team throws to the wall and see what sticks. We're going to talk that. I got a couple of things I want to talk about as far as strategies go for your fantasy leagues in the second half of the program. But let's just address the elephant in the room for just a moment and get it out of the way. It was not a midlife crisis. I just decided that after 3 or 4 years, I wanted to change up the podcast name. The Hateful Hitman was something that I thought was very unique in the style on its own, just because it blended the names of 2 of the fantasy leagues that I ran, the Hateful Eight and the Devi Hitman, and it combined those 2 names, the Hateful Hitman. It was something clever at the time, but I always knew deep down I wanted something a little bit better. And I started kicking around all kinds of ideas over the past several months. And to be honest with you, nothing really stuck. But then I thought, well, if we're going to do it, now's the time to do it, before the draft, before we really ramp up podcasting, really ramp up fantasy football, OTAs, things of that nature. I thought, now's the time to make the change. I technically already had my season premiere 2 episodes ago. I debuted this last week on a live feed on Podbean with special guest Chris Frazier from Spear Addicts Podcast down in Tallahassee, Florida. He was live on with me. This is the first of the new podcasts that will be going out to all the platforms. I wanted something that sounded a little bit more football-centric. The A-gap's been done. The B-gap's been done. Blitz the C-gap has been done. But since my name is Chris, it kind of just made sense, the C-gap Blitz. So I thought about it. I kicked it around. I slept on it for several days, and voila, that's been the name change. And I hope it catches on, and hopefully I don't say Hateful Hitman too much, but my Twitter handle will still be @HatefulHitman. That'll still be the same. My fantasy leagues will still be ran under HFP, Hitman Fantasy Productions. Those things will not change. Just the podcast name, and trying to draw maybe a little bit more listeners that are football-centered, because let's face it, the Hateful Hitman didn't just ring out, football. So that is the underlying reason. So you may ask yourself, well, why didn't you think of this, 4 years ago when you started this thing? Well, that's a good question. I wanted something clever, something different. And, this is just me, okay? I marketed this on myself. I learned how to podcast myself. I didn't have any help other than a few people, nudging me on and, giving me good vibes and, support. Other than all the research, all the brain trust, all that was all me. And I'm not the brightest cat in the woods, so, here we are. I like the new name. I like the new logo made for me by Chris Frazier from Spear Addicts. And if you're a Florida State fan, you don't listen to Spear Addicts or follow that page, there's something wrong with you. He is really knowledgeable. Appreciated having him on. We'll definitely have him on again in the near future. So welcome in. Welcome aboard the new voyage, That is the same voyage. We just jumped a different boat. I want to start today's show with talking college softball. And I know this is a football podcast. However, I do talk about a lot of sports. I've talked wrestling before. I've talked baseball, softball, basketball. So it's not just football centered. It covers everything, but the foundation of it is football. I've taken a little bit of heat from a few different people recently about my fandom for the Florida State women's college softball team, who, if you don't know, are ranked in the top 4 or 5 in the country and have their best record in FSU softball history as of their win and sweep yesterday of the Clemson Tigers. So yes, I have been a fan of theirs for several years now, and it's definitely something that is very entertaining. I enjoy it. It's better than watching college baseball, and it's certainly better than watching Reds baseball. So, and to boot, they're good. So here's my thing. Here's my I say that to say all of this, okay? If you're a fan of baseball or a fan of sports or a fan of a university, okay, if you call yourself a fan of a university, then you want to see all their sports succeed, whether it's a soccer team, lacrosse team, girls basketball, softball, swimming, whatever. You want to see them do good. It's the way you should be. You couldn't just say, well, I like the Ohio State Buckeyes football team. I don't care about any other sport. Okay. And you can think that. I don't. Okay. I like the school. I like what it stands for. I like its heritage, its history. And I like that it gives me something to watch in the spring that's exciting and entertaining. So if you've never watched women's college softball, I challenge you to do this. Okay? Now, I'm not saying I sat down and watched BYU and Utah, because I don't. I just don't. That interests me 0%. But if you're a fan of a college, okay, and this is definitely a help, okay, go watch a softball game. Because if you truly are a fan of that university, it will suck you in. And all it takes is an interesting game, a high stakes game, and you learn in just a few of the players' names and positions, a little bit of their background, and you're hooked. Okay, you're hooked. And that's how it was for me. So if you're truly a fan of a university, go watch that college team play. Give them some support. You'll be glad you did. So I don't mind taking the crap from people. People are like, why are you watching softball? Well, have you watched the Reds this year? Whatever part of the country you're in, baseball's fun. Baseball's fun to watch only if your team's good. And, my team's the Reds. And I've gotten out of touch with the Yankees over the past couple of seasons because they got rid of everybody I liked, when as I was coming up. So, watching baseball is no fun for me. So I don't mind taking the hits. Well, that's a dumb sport, and you're, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Hey, I like it. I'm putting it out there as I like it. I had about a 4-minute rant on college softball. Give it a chance. You might like it. We do have the NFL draft coming up this Thursday. And in a draft that is, shall I say, not really quarterback driven, like a few in the past have been, there are several questions as to where these quarterbacks are going to go, where they're going to land. I've seen mock after mock after mock, and look, I don't mock draft. Okay, I don't mock draft. To me, it's counterproductive. I don't mock draft for fantasy football. Some people think it's a great thing to do, and that's fine. There are a lot of people that, do it, and I'm okay with their doing it. I just choose not to. It's counterproductive because it's just a guessing game, and you can say, well, in my mock draft, I got Kenny Pickett at the 12-13 turn of the second round. Nothing's guaranteed there. I mean, so mock drafting to me is, I don't. Now, that being said, it's kind of hypocrisy of me. I do listen to mock drafts. I listen to the results of mock drafts, but to personally engage in a mock draft, I just don't do it. But these quarterbacks, these rookie quarterbacks, we're talking Corral, Pickett, Sam Howell, and probably the one that's the most mysterious out of all of them is Malik Willis, because we've seen the arm strength displayed at the combine. There's no doubt about it. He can throw the ball a mile. I've heard there's accuracy issues that weren't really evident at the combine that will show up once we hit training camp and into this actual season. But here's the thing. I've heard everything from no quarterbacks taken in the first round to teams reaching and taking quarterbacks in the first round when they shouldn't. And a couple examples come to mind with that, one of which is one of my all-time favorite quarterbacks at FSU, and Christian Ponder. They said the Vikings reached for him in the first round just because the pool wasn't very deep. To that I say, whoa. Because Christian Ponder had 2 master's degrees at Florida State. Okay, I know that doesn't translate to football field play, but he didn't get a fair shake. So I don't think that they reached for him. But teams do reach. So on that note, I do believe there will be some quarterbacks taken in the first round, at least 2. Just because there are 2 glaring teams that stick out to me that need quarterbacks. Pittsburgh and Seattle. Those 2 teams come to my mind first. And you can sprinkle in Atlanta, you can sprinkle in Detroit. But to me, Seattle and Pittsburgh need quarterbacks. Unless something were to happen and a trade takes place and a quarterback ends up going to Seattle, you're looking at, I believe it's Geno Smith and Drew Lock. That's enough said right there. They're looking for a quarterback. Pittsburgh's replacing a Hall of Famer. First ballot Hall of Famer. Okay, that doesn't happen overnight. One of their quarterbacks tragically got hit by a dump truck, a couple weeks ago. So they're definitely in the quarterback market. So those 2 teams, I'm not even sure if Seattle has a first-round pick. They may not. They may end up having to do some trading to trade up into the first round to get a guy. I haven't looked that far into the draft yet. But I can't sit here and say that there's going to be 0 quarterbacks taken in the first round. Because the need is so pressing for not just 2, but 3, 4, 5 of these teams in the NFL that they may take a shot. They might have to take a shot. McNabb was at the end of his career. The Vikings, some say, reached and took Christian Ponder. Jacksonville reached, took Blaine Gabbert in the same draft. Okay? One of those quarterbacks really panned out. Obviously, Blaine Gabbert. I think he was even a backup somewhere last year. He's still in the league. Christian Ponder is doing just fine, married to Samantha Ponder, and they're all well and good. He didn't need to play football anymore. Luckily for him, his wife makes all kinds of money for ESPN. If we're going to play 2 scenarios here, and then we'll get into something else I want to talk about. If two of these three guys can fall, or Seattle moves up, or even Pittsburgh could possibly move up. If they're afraid that a guy might get taken ahead of them, Pittsburgh may need to trade up. If Pittsburgh could land Matt Corral or Kenny Pickett, and I've said this before just recently, when they signed Trubisky, he was a bridge for a younger quarterback. If they could sign Pickett or Matt Corral in this draft, or draft one of these two guys, use Trubisky as that bridge to groom these guys, either one of these guys I think could be, they have what it takes from what I've seen in college to be franchise quarterbacks at the NFL. Now, I know there's Pickett's hands, and Corral's been injured. For one, I don't think Corral's going to run in the NFL like he did in college. I think they're going to, I mean, the teams might not restrict it, but the NFL is going to take some of that away. That's the first thing that comes to your mind. To me, anyway, is when you see Matt Corral, you think, okay, mobility first, arm second. That's just me. Kind of the same with Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. I'm kind of the same way. Athleticism first, quarterback talent second. It's just the way, in my opinion. I thought Kenny Pickett got robbed out of the Heisman last year. He came back to Pitt to do exactly what he did. Okay, put himself on paper to make himself known in the NFL. Now, being an ACC guy, I had already seen him. And he's a bigger guy. He's mobile. He can run, quietly. And there's all kinds of speculations on all of these guys. Okay, there's pluses and minuses to all these quarterbacks. It's no clear-cut one to me this year. There's no clear-cut, okay, who's my number one quarterback? I don't have that. You had that with Joe Burrow. So there's no clear cut now. It's like everybody's got good, but then everybody's also got with Pickett, they say his hands, and they say that maybe, just maybe, Addison, the wide receiver there at Pitt, made him better than what he really was. Well, to that I can counter and say, in my opinion, here on the CGAP Blitz podcast, Jerry Rice made Joe Montana better than what he was. And look where Joe Montana went. So, there's pluses and minuses to all these guys. Okay, my personal favorite is Pickett. I think, like I said just a minute ago, I think he got gypped out of the Heisman last year. He had the numbers, and he had the on-field production to win that award. Now, Matt Corral is a fantastic athlete. Okay, watching him in college and playing against him in college fantasy was awe-inspiring, other than playing against him because that was nerve-wracking. But when he was right, man, he could put up some numbers. In the SEC, which some say is the best conference in college football. So he has that going for him. Malik Willis, arm strength. Probably the best we've seen in a while. Accuracy is an issue. He transferred to Liberty. I'm pretty sure he was either Auburn or Clemson, one of the two. I don't have it in front of me right now. He was at one of them schools. Left there and went to Liberty. So, I mean, he was scouted and recruited Power 5 coming out of high school. And he went, it was Auburn or it was Clemson. I can't remember which one. So it was a big time program. Big time program. Didn't work out there, left, goes to Liberty, and the next thing you know, Liberty is just winning games like crazy in college because of the quarterback. And you had to have that. He had to do that at Liberty in order to make his draft stock worth something. Okay, he couldn't go to Liberty and put up okay numbers. He had to go to Liberty and light it up every single week, or else he's playing down to the competition. And then your draft stock hits the toilet. Sam Howell, University of North Carolina, huge prospect coming out of high school. Committed to FSU, the second all-time ultimate snub that school's had when he said, "Nah, I'm not. My dad don't want me to be that far from home. I'm going to UNC." Goes to UNC, has a fantastic first couple of seasons, and then we just kind of get used to him. Okay? And then the last 2 seasons, nothing really impressed me about Sam Howell. I love that FSU beat him both times. That's karma for you. You snub that school and then you can't beat them. But that tells you something, especially 2 years ago, in a COVID year, Norvell's first season, they go there. Actually, no, the first game was in Tallahassee. They come to Tallahassee, and Norvell beats Sam Howell in a COVID year. With that team was a shell of what it was last year and what it should be this coming year. This past year, they go to North Carolina. And I don't remember the score, but I think FSU hung a 40-burger on them. So, he didn't play well in big games. Now, what do I always say? If you've listened to this podcast before, and people have said, "How do you grade quarterbacks?" I grade quarterbacks on how they play in big games. That's my secret. There's not really, it's not magic. If you play well in big games against big name competition in big schools, then you're going to grab my attention, and I'm going to focus on you going forward. Sam Howell did not do that. Kenny Pickett did do that. I put Kenny Pickett up ahead of a lot of these guys. Willis, Corral. Maybe it's because he has something to prove. I don't know. But I just like that kid, and I'm cooling down on Sam Howell. I will say this, and then we'll move on to a different subject. I do not like the Steelers. I'm not a Steelers fan. Never have been, never will be. I have 2 dear friends of mine that are. But I am definitely interested to see if, 1, they take a quarterback with their first pick, and 2, who it is. Because I think that gentleman has the inside track to being a starter sooner than later. Now, Seattle is going to have a problem. There's still a chance that they may trade for a quarterback. But the second one on my list is who's going to go to Seattle. The reason it's second is because Pete Carroll just loves to dangle the carrot out there a little bit with a quarterback and then pull him back and pull the reins on him. And that's the reason why Russell Wilson is in Denver now. So, very curious to see if Pittsburgh takes a quarterback and who it is. We'll be watching that person carefully for the purposes of college or for the purposes of fantasy football. I love the NFL draft. It's like opening presents. You're going to see what your team, the team that you root for, not just fantasy-wise, but the team that you root for, who they're going to take. But then also fantasy-wise, what players am I going to target at my upcoming fantasy drafts, because they are going to start firing off soon after the NFL draft. As a matter of fact, I have a league, and if I looked at it right, the NFL draft ends on Saturday. We start drafting the very next day. So, they are kicking off. We've already held our Devy draft, our Devy portion, and our Devy league. That draft is the following week. So, in my bubble, in my space, my drafts are taking off. It's fun. Before you know it, we'll be into OTAs, and the next thing you know, we'll be into mini camps, and then we'll be into fall practice. The summer will go by quick. So on that note of fantasy football drafts kicking off, I want to talk about my first of 2 topics this evening. And I want to talk cold trades, and I want to talk draft time strategies. Neither one are very deep, but I want to give you a little insight to both. And you say, what's a cold trade? Well, I don't think there's an actual thing called a cold trade. It's just what I call a cold trade. It's when I'm sitting here, and the majority of my leagues are on Sleeper. On all the leagues that I'm in, I think out of 13 leagues, 10 of them are on Sleeper. Maybe even 11. And you'll get that little Sleeper bot that pops up that says, so-and-so's offered you a trade. That's a cold trade. When somebody just looks at their team and looks at your team and says, okay, I'm going to offer this guy this for this. It's a cold trade. I don't like them. I'm not in favor of them. And some of my home leagues and leagues that are more established, the Hateful Hitman League, the Chumps League, the Devi League, even College to Canton League, which is going into its third season now, I will reach out to these people. And I will say, hey, I'm interested in so-and-so. First of all, are you interested in trading him? And two, let's see what we can work up before an actual trade is sent. Because I get some of the wildest and dumbest cold trades just by people just trying to get rid of their cannon fodder because they're going to have to cut them before the draft. This is no kidding. And I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to name a league. But I got offered Ryan Fitzpatrick for a 2022 third-round draft pick the other day. To me, that is insulting, for one. And anybody why would you offer that to someone? Okay, this is a dynasty league. Okay, Ryan Fitzpatrick has zero value. Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick has a 0.5% value and 2 quarterbacks for Superflex leagues right now. He has zero value in 1 quarterback leagues, whether it be redraft, dynasty, startup, or anything. So to offer that cat to me for a third-round draft pick is insulting. And I wish that there was a way to react to a trade by giving someone the middle finger, because I would do it to that guy. That's just dumb. So, some leagues you have no choice but to. You know what? That's not true. You can always, no matter what league you're in, whether it's on Sleeper, NFL, ESPN, whatever, you can reach out to these guys. There's message boards on all of them. And say, hey, get with me. Let's work out a trade. Don't just send me some cold trade hoping to spark something. Because usually, as a matter of fact, I've never seen a cold trade sent to me that I've accepted. It's usually just as fast as I can reject them, I do. Because you're trying to give me your garbage for something of some kind of value. And I get it. Every owner is in it for themselves, and they're trying to make their team look good. And if they can get away with, stealing somebody from somebody, that's on them. That's on the person that made the trade. I don't knock anybody for that, but it's the other person's job to do their due diligence and say, hey, this is a dumb trade. I'm not accepting it. Or else if I accept this, I'm never going to hear the end of it. If you must send a cold trade, okay? And look, I've said this before time and time again, and this is the world of fantasy. It is impossible to win every trade. Now, there are those in certain leagues I'm in that think that is a lie. They are going to win every trade. That's just the way it goes. Or they're not going to trade. Well, then you're not going to trade. Okay? At least not with me. Because, I'm willing to give and take. Okay, I'm stingy with trades, and, if it's a higher value player, then I'm going to want a little bit more from them. That's just nature. But there are some people in certain leagues that just think, I'm not going to lose a trade, I'm going to win every trade. But the person you're trading with most likely thinks the same exact thing. Okay, that's where the negotiation and the discussion has to come into play. That's why messaging the person, talking to the person, however, getting something going, okay? and say, hey, I'm looking at this. If you're wanting this player, I'm looking for, some help. Maybe it's an IDP league. I'm looking for some help at linebacker because, I've had a couple of guys that have been hurt or they're just not panning out. How can you help me out? And it gets something going. Then, if a trade is sent, at least you're on the same paper. At least you're in the same realm with that person. I have never accepted a cold trade. Probably won't. Now, there has been some that's been sent to me that were close. At least they were not laughable. In which case, I will then probably DM this person and say, hey, okay, I see you sent me a trade for this. I mean, we're close, but we need to figure out how we can make this happen. Once again, it all goes back to negotiating. So I'm all for starting the process by conversation, and then start sending your deals back and forth. Say, hey, well, I could throw in a second and maybe a future first, if you're wanting something pretty heavy or whatever. However you want to do it. But look, cold trades to me are a waste of time, and if you haven't been able to tell by now, I'm not a fan. It is draft time, like we talked about a little bit ago. NFL draft starts this weekend. Fantasy drafts kick off after that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some strategies that I look for that have helped me and that maybe they can help you too. Okay, the first one is it's okay to move back in the draft. If you've got a solid team that's in win now mode, your odds of getting the piece you need to win a championship in the draft is probably very thin. Maybe 10%. Unless there's Jamar Chase. You got lucky. Okay? So, if you've got a team that's put together and you were so close last year, and I use this as an example. I had this in the Chumps League. I was so close. I had the best record in the regular season. I had a first-round bye. I got past my first-round game, and I got beaten in the semis. Again. Pretty much my entire team's coming back. Okay? I made a couple of trades. Didn't change much. Didn't change much of the ingredients that I got. I got pretty much everybody coming back. So that's win now mode for me. I use it as an example because I don't see anything in this year's draft in the first round or two that's going to change that. That I'm going to be able to get that's going to help me win the championship right now. Now, this is different for people who are rebuilding. Because if you're rebuilding, you want to grab you want to trade away some stuff and move up to get 2 or 3 of the top players in this draft. Breece Hall. So, it's okay to move back as a strategy if you're in win now mode. Because if you're trading back, in essence, you're saying, okay, I'm going to move back so that I can pick up something for future. And it's probably going to be a rostered player that you're going to add for one of these first-round picks this year. So don't be afraid to move back. Perfectly fine. We talked a little bit about reaching earlier in the NFL draft. In fantasy, it's a whole different ballgame. Okay? Because it's a game. It's why it's called fantasy. You're not tinkering with a real life. It's a fantasy. And if the league falls apart tomorrow, you're literally out your entry fee. That's it. You can reach in fantasy football. Now, don't reach too far. I'm not reaching from what I think can be a third-round pick into the first round. I've done those in my early years just to have the guy, knowing it wasn't, I just wanted the guy. Not a good strategy if you're trying to win. But let's say you pick dead smack dab in the middle of a 10 team. Say you pick at the 105. Okay, which means you come right back around and you pick again in the middle of the second round. Now you can say there is a 35-45% chance that the guy you want to hold off on may be there in the second round. But there's also a chance he might not be, because you got 10 picks before it gets back to you, or 9 before it gets back to you. Okay, so don't bet your life that those 9 picks, somebody doesn't know what you know. Okay, because if you're in the league with any kind of competition, you're not pulling fast ones on anybody anymore. Okay, not in seasoned dynasty leagues that have been around for 10 years. You're not pulling the wool over anybody's eyes. Everybody knows everybody. So, if you pick at the 105 and you think, I better get the guy that I want here because it's a position of need and I need it, don't be afraid to pull the trigger there. Because he's probably not going to make it back to you. He very well may, depending on what those other teams need. But if one or two of those teams need the same thing you do, you ain't getting that guy. He ain't making it back. Because they know his name too. And they've seen footage. And they've watched film. And if he's a Buckeye, they've watched him play on Saturday for the past 3 years. So, it's okay to reach in fantasy. I don't like reaching in the NFL. But in fantasy, you have to. Because if there's a guy that you've watched and you like, and you've seen him at the combine, and everybody's talking him up, everybody's heard that. Get your guy. Get your guy. Brian Wickham, probably the smartest fantasy mind I've ever been around, said it clear as day about 8 or 9 years ago. He said, I'd rather have the guy I want and him suck than him be on somebody else's team and do good. I think I've probably said that before on this podcast. That just echoes with me every time I see a guy. I'm like, okay, I'm taking a chance. I'm taking a shot, and I would rather him suck for me than blow up for somebody else. That's just the nature of it. So if you want to reach, you can reach. Last strategy point, and we're going to get out of here. When you're getting down to the last 4 rounds of your fantasy draft, okay, do not mail it in. Do not mail it in. Do not say, hey, whatever, I'll take a random tight end. No, don't. Do not. Okay, especially in leagues and these are very few and far between that don't have them anymore. That's taxi rounds. We have taxi rounds in all of our sleeper leagues, and you can stash dudes there for a couple of years. So don't just look. See every pick through. Maybe you picked up an extra 7th round pick in a trade 2 years ago, and you have 2 7ths now. Make those picks count. Okay, look down the list of your teams and say, hey, you know what? I really need to take another defensive end. He may not work out, but I need to roster one. Okay, go get one. Defensive ends and IDP are gold. You can get a couple of good ones, they're going to put you in a championship. Okay, don't waste your late round picks. Just because it's late round, you think everybody's gone, and you are probably right. The chances of those guys panning out aren't very good, but they might. Okay, but only do it in position of need. If you've got 15 wide receivers, don't take another wide receiver that might not hit, or it's probably not going to hit. Okay, go to a position. I'm like, I only got 4 defensive ends, and one of them's been in the league 15 years. I didn't get anything up at the top because I took Breece Hall, and I ended up getting Kenny Pickett, so I'm down to the scrubs. Make your picks count. And I can think of one player that this worked out for, at least in the short term. And that's James Robinson from Jacksonville. went almost dead last, and then even undrafted in a couple of leagues, but was taken in one league I'm in like the second to last round, just because, you're taking a stab at players of need. And look how that worked out, okay? It worked out good in the short term. He got hurt last year, but when you drafted James Robinson and then late in your draft, you didn't think, I'm going to have a starting running back by week 3, but it worked out. So make your picks count. And yeah, if you can stash them in the flex or in the taxi, stash them in the taxi for a year because they're probably not going to do much playing. They may work their way onto the field. You never know. And sure, if you give him a year or two and he's nothing but hurt and then he gets signed to the practice squad in Minnesota, cut him. Let him go. But make them count the day of, because you never know when that player, you may just end up having to use them. That is it. C-Gap Blitz in the books. This one's going to be on all the platforms. The live version was only available on Podbean. Go check that out. Check out this podcast wherever you find podcasts. My name is Chris Straswald. You can find me on Twitter at Hateful Hitman. You can find the show, like I said, everywhere. Enjoy your Sunday afternoon. It's beautiful here in Ohio. We're looking at 75 and sunny. It is a picture-perfect day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Watch the draft. See who our teams are going to get. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on The Blitz.